Yeah, there you go.
Dun, dun, dun. All right, day two of FAHA 2023. We are working on physiologic and emotional challenges that occur with fluoroquinolone toxicity today. These are going to be overview slides because we're going to be doing these in expanded form in the future. People can talk during the presentation that will be recorded. And we will have a question and answer section that'll be separately recorded. Okay, everybody should have had some kind of problem with their gut and biome with fluoroquinolone toxicity, even if it was just transient. Just the loss of bacteria and the overgrowth of smaller numbered species tends to give people some symptomatology. There's reasons why that can be significant in people. Mitochondrial dysfunction, some people think this is the major and most fundamental problem that happens with fluoroquinolone toxicity. I don't know that that's true for sure, but it is a problem for sure. Endocrine dysfunctions and DNA injuries all could be easily, all of these could easily be conferences all on their own. There's a lot of information with all of this material. So we're just going to do overviews, and then in the future, I'll just do piece by piece information sharing. Okay, basic this is a basic synopsis of one set of, as we talked about yesterday, dominoes. One starts and then knocks over three, and that knocks over three, and that knocks over three. So loss of dominant bacterial species. The bacteria that live in us are helpful for the most part. They're protective of species that can be challenging for our health and wellness. They make us different vitamins, and they can actually work with our immune system. And believe it or not, at the quantum level, this is something that Mark Harris gave us last year. At the quantum level, our mitochondria communicate with our gut biome. He had a whole set of slides on how that happens. And if you start to understand the foundation under the cellular level of our existence, it's scary what we do on a regular basis in the medical community. But it leads to a completely different understanding and respect for what we are when we know ourselves at the quantum level. Okay, so you got overgrowth of yeast and undesirable bacteria species when you kill off all the stuff that is beneficial. This leads to immunogenic inflammation. That's one of 10 different kinds of inflammation that I have in a completely separate talk, that are all the different physiologic processes that we call inflammations. I think they should all have a completely different name, not called inflammation, because they're not all running through the immune system, and I think those are the only ones that should be called inflammation. But that's just my bias. It just leads to confusing information. Okay. Another thing that happens when we get undesirable species, we get actually loss of neurotransmitter production and absorption. I don't know if anybody knows this, but the amount of our serotonin that's created in our body, which we usually associate with mood in the brain, 95% of that is created in our gut and absorbed into our gut and goes to our brain. So that's one of the major gut-brain connections that we don't talk about on a really regular basis. But without the neurotransmitters from the gut, the brain doesn't work very well. Mood, happiness, interaction, connection. So that's one of the ways you get emotional dysregulation, is you have loss of neurotransmitters because of the toxic chemistry that has occurred in the gut. You get poor digestion, of course. The bugs are actually helping out with that process in a lot of different ways. Less absorption, less vitamin production. Those three together, harder for our nutrition status to be in good shape. immune dysregulation because of inflammation that's now occurring. Actually get breakdown of your gut-brain barrier, your gut-blood barrier, leaky gut, which leads to more immunogenic inflammation and leaky brain. Each of these points could be a talk on their own, how they each happen, what happens, and how they start to interact with all the other pieces of the equation, why the immune system starts to dysfunction. And there's one piece of this equation that actually is not in the entirety of our discussions today. That'll be its own talk, and I'll have somebody on the podcast with me who works only in this area. Has anybody heard of the endocannabinoid system? For more than 10 years, I've been actually telling people how to use hemp and marijuana as ways to help to regulate immune system, hormonal system, neurologic system by growing and ingesting their own products. That'll actually be something that we'll do probably a couple of different podcasts on, with then the ability to be able to amp up very particular cannabinoids. There are over 550 cannabinoids. And then with those cannabinoids come anandamides, terpenes, polyphenols, and a few other families of substances, all of which are nearly ubiquitously positive for people's regulation of mood, emotion, hormone, immune system, and nervous system. Please don't get me on the subject because it's kind of the other side of the equation from the dark side of medicine, where fluoroquinolines have continued to be allowed to be used. Things like cannabinoids have been vilified when they're ubiquitously nearly always positive for our health, wellness, function, and healing. So that'll be a big subject in and of itself. His name is Travis Felton. I've known him for 15 years. He's what we call a cannabinoid savant. The cross breeds that he's created have tremendous levels that help improve the hormonal and immune and the neurologic system. They all are 3 letters, just like THC. They're all 3 letters long, and there are 550 of them. And which form that they're in matters to how they function in the body. So I put that in the original discussion, but I didn't put on this slide. But above all of these things is the endocannabinoid system. And that'll be a big subject for the future for us to talk about. I'd love to hear how many people have tried any of these things. This is just gut biome, hepatic support, and treatments. These are the things that we do here. Almost all of these, but there are a lot of ways to work at improving the gut. Fasting could be a couple of talks in and of itself. The hormonal, the local chemoregulation, local messengers, and changes that happen in the gut and in the hormonal system, as well as total body inflammation, mental clarity. Fasting should, in my opinion, at this point, should be part of everybody's regimen, probably 5 days a month. Whether you do that 0 calories or up to 500 a day is up to each individual, but there is some benefit actually to doing those days back to back to back as well. You get turnover of your non-used white blood cells, decreasing total body inflammation that way. This is what I have people do before they do stem cell procedures with me, because it decreases pain after the procedure is about 50%. Melatonin. This is a lot of research from Dr. Harris on melatonin at very high doses. Just little tidbits on this. You get 6 times the absorption with sublingual forms of melatonin compared to oral, and taken before sleep, of course. But again, melatonin is also created and used in the gut more than it is in the brain, actually. And its effects. He gave a big talk on how it affects just the mitochondria, really, really positively. So his products are through a company called OHS. He didn't ask me to tell everyone this, but he's given talks for us a couple of times at the FAHA conferences on mitochondrial function, and he's an amazingly brilliant human. So OHS has his formulations of different supplements. Immune system regulation by individualized diets, lots of different versions of these. Our dietitian does the mediator release test with the LEAP reintroduction program. There was not surprisingly, there was a question on the FAHA group this morning by someone who wanted to know from everybody else what kind of diet works. Now stop for a second and look at your fingerprints, everybody. Unless you have an identical twin, nobody else out there has those fingerprints. Your immune system is that individualized as well. And nobody on the face of the earth should be giving anybody else dietary advice that was beneficial for them, because it's that individualized and that personalized. That might sound a little bit staunch, but I'm going to tell you that nothing translates from one person to another on diets. Everyone has to find what their immune system likes and eat that food. And sometimes the frequency and the amount actually matter for each individual person. This is why I like Carrie Collett. She's our dietitian, doing this with people so that they understand how personalized this is. Now, that's only 170 things that her test looks at. But when you do that kind of narrow of a evaluation and individualized reintroduction program, it's extremely effective for people's pain. Her people's pain go down about 75% within the first 2 or 3 weeks. And that's how much the gut is connected to our inflammatory state, our hormonal state, and the overall pain that we experience. Supplement support's pretty obvious on that one. No processed foods, pretty obvious. Pre and probiotics, which ones, how much, highly variable. I leave that up to Carrie and Paul Nash. He's our naturopath chiropractor. Ozone, there are 2 ways to get this. Well, 3 ways actually. You can get it into the blood directly. You can get it through the ears, transauric. And there's actually a supplement from US Enzymes that bonds magnesium together with ozone. And that ozone then makes it into the small intestine. That's called Cleanzyme. Beta-glucan. This is something I don't think anybody's heard me talk about before. One of my patients actually discovered a novel version of beta-glucan that's created by marine bacteria, and it stimulates fibroblasts to make collagen, and it regulates macrophage function. This novel beta-glucan also there's a topical form of it. So you can actually affect people's sense of where they are in space and their function by strengthening the collagen by doing topical treatments. You'll have to ask me about those separately. I'm one of the only persons that has the source for the topical one. The beta-glucan can be, it's called Betazyme, can be gotten through US Enzymes. During our Q&A, if anybody wants to share any story about fecal transplants, that would be helpful. I know a few people that have gotten them, and some of the studies are starting to be pretty positive about getting a transplant of the gut bacteria. Enzymes have been around for a really long time, helping to break down the food so that it's digestible and absorbable. It shows decreased pain, inflammation, and overall health and wellness. I'm going to suggest that you don't take any yeast in. They're generally pro-inflammatory and kind of difficult to get out of your system. Liver cleanse, we do these quite a bit. The liver actually, of all antibiotics, the fluoroquinolones have the highest rate of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So it's known to hit the liver pretty hard. Pancreatic support, also known to hit the pancreas pretty hard. Because of the known liver problems, generally avoiding NSAIDs, Tylenol, and alcohol. Other reasons to avoid these things too. This is just liver related. Glutathione for the liver. A lot of other reasons to take glutathione, as you all know. Magnesium. A lot of other reasons to take that. Acupuncture. As with all other types of modalities that we use and have, including our Rolfer and our deep emotional healing programs, and even the regenerative injections, there needs to be a significant sixth sense for people who are doing these paradigms and procedures. Just sticking a bunch of needles in somebody because that's what the book said is maybe half of the equation. Understanding the nuance of how that all goes together and being able to feel and sense that person's needs and energetic signature is really important. So I don't work with anybody that does these kinds of procedures unless they have a significant sixth sense. If there's a lot of pain going on, aneurysm in the aorta is not the only place that aneurysms can happen. As we talked about yesterday, that loss of collagen in any big artery can be the cause. Now, in medicine, this is one of those zebras that pop up sometimes, and pain out of proportion to exam is what is usually discussed when we're talking about celiac artery aneurysms. I've known a few people that have had this. Vagal nerve stimulation, if you guys aren't doing this, I would suggest that you do. Any increase in vagal function decreases sympathetic overstimulation. And then that sympathetic relaxation, one of the things being the stellate ganglion block that can do that. But there are other ways to relax the sympathetic nervous system: meditation, emoto energy work, all those things, Rolfing, organ massage, lasers. We've used this a bit with people with abdominal challenges, but mostly this is with pain, but decreasing pain improves vagal nerve function and decreases sympathetic tone. That's a ton of stuff all in one slide. All those things could easily be a talk of their own, but this is how many ways that we can skin the cat, so to speak. Okay, I call this one of the three fundamental injuries. You can get direct DNA gyrase injuries with mitochondria. Also difficulty with detoxification. Support's critical. My favorite supplement for that is actually MitoCore. And then melatonin, really important for function of the mitochondria as well. I try not to go too much into specifics of supplements because they're so different for each person based on their immune system, their inflammatory state, how well they're absorbing, how well their enzymatic function inside of the cells, inside of the mitochondria are working. Very different for each person. And we have the ability to evaluate a lot of those functions. People don't need to, kind of grope in the dark trying to figure out what to take or how much to take of things. That can be a guided process. That's one of the reasons I started FAHA. Again, Mark Harris outlined in the 5 different complexes of mitochondria, 22 sites of potential injury and need for supplementation. That's going to vary based on genetics, based on internal function of the cells themselves, based on enzymatic function, based on buildup of metabolites. So the order, the route, and the amount of different supplementation, really controversial. Hands down, I'm going to say my opinion is healing the gut and the inflammatory state so your body can absorb the way that it's meant to through the gut covers at least 2 pieces of the equation. Number 1, it helps you be more independent. And number 2, it keeps you from overloading the system really quickly and then producing potentially other metabolites where an enzyme is not working down the road. That's one of the dark sides of doing IV therapies. When they are done, and our naturopath will guide us on that, I tend to do something that goes through one set of enzymatic complexes, then the next, then the next, then the next, and not just shotgun throw a bunch of nutrients at people. I don't like throwing things up against the wall and hoping it sticks. Let's see. The adducts that we are going to talk about in a little while in a slide or two here. Adducts are chemicals that attach to DNA that can happen via ionic bonds or covalent bonds. This can happen with a lot of chemical products, petroleum products. Let's see, herbicides. It can happen with chemotherapy agents. So the adducts that happen with fluoroquinolones are covalently bonded to guanine. And there is the potential for SNPs, SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, i.e. changes in your DNA from copy to copy of your cells if these adducts are present. That should horrify you a little bit, if not a lot. It's not known how adducts, if there's 4 or 5 different families of adducts on connected to DNA, it's not known if they interact with each other. It's also not known if it significantly changes transcription, because your DNA is transcribed into codes that allow for creations of proteins and enzymes. And there's some thought that these bulky extra molecules attached to the DNA may cause some dysfunction in that process, but it's not known definitively. There's some lab testing that's available for finding DNA adducts. 50 out of 50 people in Jersey studies had adducts when they were tested. So that's known fact at this point. Let's see, lab testing, for the mitochondrial injuries also possible. I mean, you can at the very least do Oates tests. There's lots of other ways that you can evaluate mitochondrial function. As I talked about earlier, loss of communication with your biome leads to changes in how the mitochondrial function. I'll have to see if Mark will let me give his talk at some point in time. Crazy stuff, things that happen under, minus 10 meters, I think that's like 15 or 9 nanometers or something like that. That's small in the body, is in the quantum realm. And things like, 1 hydrogen molecule have been shown under scanning electron microscopy to enter receptors and then like split into 3. And each of those receptors are filled a third of the time by 1 hydrogen molecule. It's stuff that just does not make sense in our Newtonian world, but it's really fun to think about. And then again, there's a way to do transplants. Myself and a PhD biologist actually created a way to be able to get autologous mitochondria and do transplants. So that's a big topic in and of itself, and a lot of work and intellectual property that we put into that. All right, endocrine and exocrine injuries: pancreas, liver, thyroid, testes, hypothyroid, or the hypothalamus, not hypothyroid. Boy, look at me, I made a mistake on my slide. That's hypothalamus, not hypothyroid. And then the adrenal glands, although thyroid is also in there. Pretty much every function endocrine wise in the body has some effect from the fluoroquinolones. There are some studies out there specifically for sperm production and testosterone that selenium and probiotic are really helpful. This is why you see selenium in IV preparations, different places. Getting a fair amount in helps clean everything up. It's kind of a scavenger intravascularly to clean up what needs to be gotten rid of in the body. And then probiotics can be, of course, various for different people. The things we want to think about: avoid the mimickers, the chemicals out there that mimic endocrine function. A lot of them are estrogen mimickers. Let's avoid as much of those as we can. Heavy metals, you need to be tested for heavy metal toxicity. Evaluate all your hormone levels to understand your current function. That really needs to be done by somebody that's really well versed in functional medicine. I used to do hormone therapies. I shared this yesterday, but I'll share it again. I did hormone therapies until it dawned on me that I was probably only doing it about 80% as well as somebody who was doing just that. And even though I was integrating that care at really good, deep levels with people, doing the hormone therapies myself, I was missing little tiny pieces of the equation when I was talking to people that did it, at a very high level. Now, I wouldn't want to go to somebody who can admittedly say I'm only doing this 80% as well as somebody who does this all the time. Why would I do that for my patients? So I let other people do that, other providers do that do it all the time. Fasting, we talked about that a bit. Your growth hormone levels will go up for 14 days of continuous fasting. I know an individual who's very, very deeply into fasting that will do a 14-day fast every year to reset hormones at that level. You need adequate fat and cholesterol to be able to make the hormones that you need. Bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, got to ensure your liver and conjugation function are good prior to administration, but tracking metabolites. And my preference is topical as much as possible, perhaps subcutaneous. That's the least irritating to the liver. And then just a little known fact, D3 thyroid and growth hormone also actually elevate the function of all your other hormones. So if you get these three in good range, or at least these two, this is a little hard to get and a little controversial, the growth hormone, but if you get D3 and thyroid in really optimal levels, it's going to improve the function of everything else. Okay, DNA, we talked about this a little bit. I think this is also one of the three fundamental injuries that occurs with fluoroquinolone toxicity. Jerzy Tuskowski is the expert on this, and he's done talks for us a couple of times with FAHA. There are adduct evaluations you can have done in Germany. I don't know that you need to necessarily, because if you've had a fluoroquinolone, you're going to have DNA adducts. Like I said, Jerzy quoted 50 out of 50 people. Mark might know some people who have or were in that test. As we talked about, single nucleotide polymorphisms, i.e. changes in DNA base pairs, can occur because of adducts. Again, transcription errors, interaction with other adducts. Question of removal is very difficult. Jerzy and I have had a lot of conversations about this. For sure, the ionic ones you can get removed without too much challenge. There are ways to try to get the covalently bonded ones removed, but they may be more damaging to the DNA than the adduct being there in the first place. So that's going to be an emerging area, we'll just say, is how do we cleanse the DNA? And then you do also get direct injury to DNA, particularly in the mitochondria, because repair genes for the DNA and the repair mechanisms within the mitochondria found on nuclear DNA are affected by fluoroquinolones. I think that's going to be a subject of some Mayo information that's coming out. All right. For those of you who don't remember my definition of healing, I'm going to put it back out again. There are a few new people here today. Ultimately, I want you all to figure out what your definition of healing means. In my last book, which was the Healing Cheat Codes, I had a very long description of, it's loss of noxious symptoms, it's improved function, it's healing of previous traumas, terrors, and improvement of relationships. All of these things all added together ultimately make healing. But what does that do? What do all those processes together do? And this might sound a little flowery, but in my opinion, healing is a consciously embraced process of refinement. You can't be made, nobody can force you to heal. If you had all of the things in step technically done that needed to be done in a healing process, but you were not the one that was consciously embracing that process, it would not work. That's another way of saying your placebo effect is more powerful than any treatment that can be done. I think you can probably all appreciate that me as a physician saying that you being the most powerful part of your healing equation is not good for business is a very honest thing to say. And I think that's actually why one of the reasons why placebo effect is so underappreciated by allopathic or mainstream medicine. It obviates the need for a lot of medical care. Okay, so those consciously embraced processes of refinement encourage you to engage your most authentic self. People can search for that for decades. There's an easy way to do that, actually. Remember back to what you were when you're about 6 years old. That's your most authentic self. When you saw everything with wonder, with hope, with possibility, you would look at somebody or something and you could feel that person. You could feel situations, could understand things quickly and intrinsically. Most of us replace those automatic processes that we come here with very intellectually based processes. Now, I'm really dang good at the intellectual processes. You'll see in a second the slide that I put together on emotional healing. But it's sort of like watching a 1-year-old who's just barely learning to walk, has to think through all of the things that they're doing compared to, an Olympic athlete performing what the human body can do. Doing what we do as an intrinsic human being versus doing what we do by thought are that different. Okay. And then this will get even a little further away from where some of you may be, that this process of refinement in your authentic self is happening in a flow with whatever your purpose for your existence is. Why am I here and what am I doing? Those are some of the most common, like, baseline questions people are asking. And once you're doing these things there, you refine to the point that you are this. That's about the time that you can start seeing what this is. That can be a whole lifetime of work, and a lot of people never have that opportunity to get through enough of the refinement to know who they are, to be able to figure out what they're meant to be doing. But that's what healing does. That's what our challenges do. That's what fluoroquinolone toxicity is doing for you. It might seem like it's completely taking you on a side path, taking you away from who you are and what you believe you're meant to be. But all of our challenges ultimately are taking us to a place of understanding this process. Okay. And everything else is just helping you feel better through your journey. So I can have 100 different ways that I could have each of you feel better. And I would be a very popular physician, and you'd be very dependent on me. I don't want to set up, 2 or 3 IVs a day and have you come back for a redo every 6 to 18 months for the rest of your life, because we never got down to the fundamental reasons and injuries that are happening. That's making you dependent on me. I'd be popular because you'd feel better, but ultimately you'd never be actually making significant progress toward these other points. This is a hard way to practice medicine, by the way. All right, little switch over. So I'm only going to do one slide on it, really. The deep emotional and energetic healing pieces of the spectrum. I mean, if all of the combinations and integrations of the collagen, the neurologic, and the physiologic aren't enough, it was about 6-7 years ago that the importance of the energetic and emotional healing of a human being are equally, sometimes more important than all of the other pieces. The other piece is you can put a bunch of slides up, and regular physicians that understand the biochemistry and how things interact. This general mainstream medicine doesn't understand at all. Emotional contribution to pain and degeneration. I mentioned Dr. Sarno yesterday. In his opinion, about 80% of all pain is emotional/energetic in nature. I think one of the big processes that happens through the challenges of our life is that we become detached from our true self. This slide, by the way, is the most complex PowerPoint slide I've ever made, and that's saying a lot. And it is a book in and of itself. Okay, we all have traumatic experiences, right? Things that scar us, cut us, change our perceptions, change our sense of safety, change our sense of understanding who we are and what we're doing in the world. So these things kind of typically start to happen, age 7, 8, 9. We start to become aware of, being in this world and who we are. And then we start to have traumas. We're kind of protected before that point in time. Even if traumatic things happen, they typically don't scar us deeply. That's not true of everybody, but that's typical. So what creates those traumatic experiences? This is Hansen's list of 12. Painful events, that's easy. Unmet needs, that's pretty easy. Toxic wants come from the fact that we have unmet needs. So we have these circular sorts of desires and shadowy kind of things that have not been fulfilled in our lives that lead to these toxic wants that become, even if our needs are met eventually, sometimes we still keep seeking for things that haven't been there. Familial inheritance, this is actually known at this point in time that our DNA can transfer from generation to generation. And more than one of us out there believes that can happen at an emotional level. Societal and cultural pressures, that's pretty obvious. Your loose ends and unresolved baggage, that those in and of themselves can cause new traumas. A lot of these things are the primary traumas, and they're starting to cause secondary traumas down the road. When we have all these things, very hard to have a really a mutually interdependent relationship with another human being. So we have codependent relationships and more challenges and traumas from that. In the upcoming book I'll be putting out, it's called Trauma to Joy. The furthest point away from our authentic selves that we can be is in a state of victimhood, believing that we are harmed, believing that we are betrayed, believing that, and that becoming like the guiding force in our life, the fact that we are a victim. That's the furthest away from our authentic self we can get. I have lots of things, I have reasons I explain that. Pattern coping mechanisms, basically the traumatic events end up creating coping mechanisms that sort of end up being your software running you all the time. So in that book, I discuss pattern coping mechanisms as being the state that most of us are walking around in, kind of like we're big bags of coping mechanisms, just trying to avoid being in pain all of the time. Triggers and amygdaloid reactionism, and then avoiding what we're actually meant to be here doing. That's kind of fighting against our own process. As we went back to my previous slide where I'm saying that, finding what you're here and meant to do is a really fundamental thing for us to do in our existence. Avoiding those personal missions by essentially struggling against the processes that are trying to bring us there is what that one means. In that first book that I wrote, one of the sections I discuss is that all struggle is directly proportional to the degree to which we are trying to hold on to versions of ourselves that are no longer serving our forward progress. All right, so some of the stuff is happening subconsciously. I know people who essentially their entire subconscious is conscious. They have barely anything that they don't remember, and that isn't like in their immediate memory, and all of the emotions, feelings, connections, words that were spoken at the time that it occurred. These are people that have what are called eidetic memory. They have basically no subconscious. And then there are things happening at the conscious level. That's what's happening down here. We're going to fill in this graph here. What happens downstream as we go away from traumatic experiences? What are the downstream effects of those traumatic experiences? Okay. You get an autonomic spectrum, so your fight or flight nervous system emotionally is going to protect you. PTSD, by the way, now is called PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury. That came out of Dr. Lipov, who was the first one doing stellate ganglion block for PTSD. That there's an injury to some of our regulatory mechanisms that keep us in a state of fight or flight, almost like a switch went off because of a severe emotional overload. Now, after you get autonomic protections, these are subconscious, of course. Then you got autonomic protections. I have a whole bunch of listed. What are these things in the book? Those spawn your coping mechanisms. So these are semi-conscious. Most people are kind of aware. They could look at the list of 80 coping mechanisms. And they could say, oh, I do that, and I do that, and I do that. But underneath that are these subconscious drivers. So this is partly conscious. And then people usually aren't aware of this when their kind of intrinsic sense of hope is waning. But that's somewhat a subconscious process that starts to manifest more obvious ways. And then you end up with what I call the transcendence burdens. This is pain, shame, guilt, doubt, insecurity, anger, resentment, bitterness, regret, remorse, despair, dishonor, and unworthiness. This is where a lot of people, these places are where a lot of people are semi-consciously living and then expressing into the conscious from those places. These things are generally very hidden. And yes, by the way, I'm a guy and a sports medicine doc, and I came up with this slide. Kind of weird. So you end up with overt symptoms, eventually, of depression and anxiety kind of spectrum going on. Fluoroquinolone toxicity, much more towards the anxiety side, probably because of GABA receptor dysfunctions and sympathetic nervous system hyperactivation concomitantly. We went over that yesterday in Floxy Neck a bit. Most people really are kind of, when they realize that they're kind of depressed and anxious, there's a self-judgment that occurs of that. They end up really hating the fact they don't want to feel like that, and they certainly don't want anybody else to know that they're feeling like this. So their ego kicks in, and that's confrontational to them and to other people around them. The four main parts of the ego that I'll go over in some of the books coming forward are pride, judgment, attachment, and fear. Those are the things that all of these things are spawning. So the manifestation of all of this stuff is showing up as what we call the ego. So we end up oftentimes distorting our world around us so that we can avoid feeling all of these things. We'll go down pathways to dull ourselves, either with chemicals or with media. We'll just bury ourselves in our career. We'll bury ourselves in being a parent. Sometimes we'll take up a cause and try to save everybody else from what we experienced. So these aren't bad things necessarily. A lot of times these identify who we are and what we're doing in life. I was a scoutmaster for 15 years, from age 18 to 33, largely because I didn't have a really good experience with my father. He wasn't able to have a really great relationship. So I was going to have relationships with other young men so that they could have what I didn't. So I was healing myself through that process. We do that a lot in our volunteering and in our choices of exercise of what we do and who we spend our time with. So the conscious version of our hope waning is that our confidence capability wane. We start to be kind of narrowed and sort of in a groove of what our capacities are. They're not free flowing. They tend to be very sequestered. And then ultimately we end up, if none of these things are like helping us feel comfortable in the world, our reactions to these things, then we just put a mask on to avoid others seeing us. I had a PhD psychologist look at this once. This is about 5 years ago that I made this graph. He goes, "Oh, this is very Jungian." I said, "Okay, is that a compliment?" But this is the way I've come to look at it, that all these processes just get entangled in themselves. And then how do we access all this stuff? And how do we start to work on it? Okay, deep personal reflection. Call that meditation, call it prayer. Functional psychoanalysis, that's somebody doing that with us, helping guide us through that. EMDR, brain spotting, brain mapping, different ways of accessing subconscious, essentially. That cervical sympathetic block, the stellate ganglion, it doesn't fix people. What I've noticed that it does do, and I've been doing it for 12 years now, is it takes the traumas that are around, the fences that are around our traumas, and drops them significantly so that those traumas can be accessed without the terror associated with the trauma. Psychedelics, we could probably have lots of discussions on psychedelics. MAPS in Canada started this about 30 years ago, microdosing, and ketamine clinics are now all over the place. So ways of accessing safely, gently accessing the subconscious and trying to understand who we are authentically without all of this burden that I just described in all these circles. That's what we're trying to get back to. Guided meditation and hypnosis, spiritual and intuitive healers. We have lots of these in the group. There are four individuals that are extremely gifted in this way. Healing-oriented friends. You become what you spend your time with. So try to find a group of people that actually are consciously trying to engage their own process of growth. Sometimes you need, and getting back to fluoroquinolone toxicity, sometimes you need something this challenging to make you want to go through these processes. This is not easy to unwind and untangle and remove all of these burdens. This is challenging. Healing first-degree relations. Yes, your mother really did not try to be a terrible mother. Your father did not try to be a terrible father. They may have done challenging things, but they didn't do it because they were trying to harm you. Your brother throwing you down the stairs at age 12 was him being mad because his girlfriend just dumped him, okay? Understand that no human is truly trying to harm you. They're just passing on the harm that they are carrying already. And then many of my friends are Christians, and the atonement process is a pretty consistent one that that's used. Okay, that is the most complicated PowerPoint slide I've ever created, and goes through a lot. Touches on pretty much all the pieces and parts of the emotional and energetic healing pathways that I had described in the handout, all of which we could go into with much greater detail. Happy to field those questions for individuals that want to go over that. And then the last thing I had on there was, how do you synthesize all this stuff? Yesterday we talked about, the Achilles and the 14 different steps between the neurologic, the blood flow, the chemistry, the collagen, the tensile compressive forces that just go into one tendon. Now, if you don't understand all of those pieces, parts, and those pathways and how they integrate with each other, you miss a lot. This is why I said yesterday that the PRP studies for Achilles tendinopathy are are terrible. They don't work that well. Maybe 25% go on to significant healing. It's because the other 13 reasons, other than the fact that there's tendinosis in a tendon, are never addressed. Today's example of the gut was another way to show you how these dominoes spread out very quickly and start to affect everything. My second synthesis, how these pathways combine at the quantum and energetic level. This is hard stuff, okay? The idea that a hydrogen molecule can split into three and be in three different set receptors at the same time doesn't make sense to our conscious brain. And trying to apply that to how a body functions, is very difficult stuff to wrap our heads around. So I'm not going to put too much of that out there yet, but it's really fun stuff to understand things at that level. We can talk about this one a little bit more in our Q&A section today. It doesn't matter what the challenge is in your life. I don't care if it was a relationship. I don't care if it was a bad teacher. I don't care if it was a nun who hit you with rulers. I don't care if it's fluoroquinolone toxicity. Treating any of these challenges as a singular event in your life relegates it to nuisance, irritant, betrayal, and pain. And it's going to stay in that form with you being a victim of that person, entity, situation, experience until you embrace it as your own. And you give it the care, attention, hope, and love that it needs to be able to go forward with it as part of you. This was a little flowery, but it came to mind, so I put it out there. I mean, you're thousands of different threads. Who you are as a person is thousands of different threads, and the fluoroquinolone toxicity is going to touch all of them because it's woven into you. And you can't extract the fluoroquinolone toxicity experience of your life without interrupting everything else. So why not leave it in your life as a way to urge and encourage the progression of your life in enthusiasm? That's what this piece is. And this stuff is what most of my work has been in the last 7 to 8 years. Learning how to do the regenerative agents and how to apply them to fluoroquinolone toxicity and many other conditions, I did in about the first 7, 8 years of my career. The last 6, 7 years has been these three. How do these things all integrate, and how do we help them become positive things for your pathways going forward? That needs to be a you understood, accepted, chosen, and driven process. I'm here as your guide through the process. And I can say that without tipping my cards too much. I will tell you, there are places and types of things that I do with regenerative agents that almost nobody else anywhere can do. That wasn't enough for me. Being one of the best at that wasn't enough. I wanted to understand how to help a human being use their mind, heart, and spirit to heal their body. Why? Because I'm selfish, ultimately. Honestly, everybody, there is no greater experience that I've had in this world than helping another human being understand their intrinsic worth and the power that they have to move forward with enthusiasm and hope. To see somebody go through, feel somebody, experience somebody going through that process is more richly privileged than anything that I can ever describe. All right. So I'm going to be doing these in much greater detail than what I did them today. They'll be posted to the Faha Facebook group and Regenerative Masters YouTube channels. Okay. Points to remember: healing and feeling better are very different. It's easy to feel better. To heal takes a lot more consideration and a lot more humbleness to be able to take you through that process. Healing happens by discovering and improving the processes that synergistically improve your function. I hit that word a lot yesterday. Healing happens by process. We showed you one process in the gut today. We showed you one process in the Achilles yesterday. And those processes, the big ones to understand, are sympathetic nervous system, cervical stability, emotional pain and dysregulation, gut aberrations, hormonal aberrations, DNA function, and let's just say cellular health. All of which were touched on in these 2 days. First chapter in my book last year was "You Are Your Own Healer." You need to understand the power of your placebo effect. You need to understand the power of your own ability to discern your own next best step. Now, you can't probably be, one of the most skilled individuals doing stem cell injections, but you can discern when it's the right time for you to do that. That's what I want people to understand. So everything can heal. That's chapter number 2. You have to do it by processes. You have to do it carefully. You have to do it collaboratively with a group of people to go through a really full spectrum and true healing process, but everything can heal. A collaborative group offers much more than one man can. I hope that's obvious as heck. And then think of this. When you apply all of these processes to yourself and you're learning and growing in a much greater degree of your authentic self, who are you at that point? What are you? What can you do? What are you engaging? Who are you spending time with? It might seem like a cruel joke, but the challenges that in our life are the things that bring us back to that version of ourselves. And if you can see fluoroquinolone toxicity as as I said yesterday, a really mean drill sergeant that made you become a better version of yourself, that's a good place to start. You can hang out in your bed and, i.e. bunk every night and grit your teeth and be angry about what it's doing, as long as you understand that ultimately it's helping you become more of what you actually can be. And if in that context you can forgive and understand that it's just your journey of your life, you understand the medical system, the FDA, the physician, the drug companies, they don't matter. They don't matter in the equation. What matters is that you embrace what you're experiencing as your formative lessons of life. All right. And yes, I can speak the highly technical right alongside the highly esoteric. All right, Q&A section for the physiologic and the emotional, energetic parts of fluoroquinolone toxicity. We're at FAHA 2023. Opening questions from everybody right now. Let me know if you want me to go back to any of those slides as you ask your questions.
Dr. Hanson, good morning. I have 2 questions, but they're not exactly related to these slides, but one I did want to follow up from yesterday, when we had talked about the cupping and the gua sha. My acupuncturist did ask, I sent her a text, and then she did ask last night, can that be, is there anything that we need to know about doing those modalities to specifically affected tissue? Like, is it okay to do it on that tissue? Or is there anything that we should really be aware of?
So I can give you general recommendations. Number 1, generally start higher in the body, like toward the neck, and more centrally in the body, and let things kind of move from those places outward into the rest of the body. If you can do, does that practitioner do acupuncture at the same time as cupping?
Yes.
Okay, so when they do it together, then doing some of the peripheral stuff together with the more centrally oriented cupping is a nice combination. Cupping tends to be a little bit more shifting, a little more jarring, and acupuncture a little bit more elegant. So I'm not an expert in any of those things. Those are just the things that I've noticed over time. So that's how I'd suggest approaching it.
Okay. Okay. So more central versus, and I guess she's thinking too, like, if there is some tissue things going on with the Achilles, how do you feel about, doing things, on the calf or, or in the area of the Achilles or
So
shoulder,
if you're going to affect neurologic function and blood flow for the Achilles, start at the low back, follow the sciatic nerve downwards, follow the split in the sciatic nerve to the tibial nerve. This is with cupping at, at whatever intervals they typically do that. And that way you're getting some of the blood flow and some of the neurologic function, at least the superficial sensory nerves that we talked about yesterday with neuroprolotherapy. You're getting that at least more significantly than you otherwise would from just, a couple of singular spots. It's a little hard to cup on the Achilles because it's pretty hard just from a shape standpoint.
Right.
So yeah, getting right up to it.
Okay.
And usually they can vary how much pressure that they're doing with the cupping.
Okay.
Based on, I think how long they put the burn on. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do think there's a way they can vary it. Yeah. I guess I've never really thought about if that's how they're doing it, but yeah.
Yeah. So start low and go slow. Pretty much everything. I mean, I do that with non-fluoroquinolone patients. Start low and go slow because you're ultimately going to elicit response, and it's better to elicit response in small bites than it is big bites. You have an extensively intuitive individual. I mean, they're going to kind of do what they're going to do anyway. So my goal here is think of as many of these processes that are affecting an Achilles together, and then you can do some cupping, some gua sha, some acupuncture all together. I don't know if you have anybody in your area that does it, but whenever anybody's doing any kind of that kind of work along with deep emotional and energetic work, I'll do stellate ganglion blocks on them, and that puts that person into such a different neurologic and emotional state that the amount of effect that can happen otherwise is really tremendous.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Was that both questions?
And the other is, I was just curious if you could, maybe on the Baja Facebook group or wherever on your website. I noticed that I think some of your providers in your group have changed. That's different than what's on the website, and like Mark Harris and some different people. And I was just wondering if there was an updated list of who is in the organization.
The only one outside of Minnesota at this point is Heather Slusher.
But I mean, is there a list of the people in Minnesota that's a part of Baja?
Good question. I haven't looked at the website for a little while. I will have.
Yeah, I don't, from what you've said, I don't think it's quite up to date. So that's what I was wondering.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. that Faha website turned out to be far too pushy from the standpoint of sales in my mind. I wanted it to be a much more educational offering, which is what Regenerative Masters is turning into from a website standpoint. That was a lesson learned. I had a group that was marketing that put together the Faha website for me. So they had that bias, and eventually we'll hopefully get a lot of that changed.
And maybe
Veg.
the list is on Regenerative Masters. Is there, I haven't looked at that lately, but
That should all be up to date on Regenerative Masters.
okay.
That's just regenerativemasters.com. Or yesterday's talk, I had a single picture with all of them on there.
Okay. I may have missed that. Thank you.
And then Sarah's wanting to know, you mentioned the changes in DNA in Jersey's research. Has there been follow-up studies after the healing techniques to show the DNA heals as well? Not yet, Sarah. He and I have had lots and lots of talks about this. The question is, and kind of from the standpoint of first do no harm, the agents that may break the covalent bonds between the quinolone molecule and the DNA that's attached to guanine, his worry is that they may be as dangerous or as damaging to the DNA as the adduct being there in the first place. So undoing it may be as bad or worse than just leaving it alone. So we don't know yet. And as I said in the talk, we can get some ionic bonds taken care of. But the covalent ones are a question mark at this point. It would have to be a really smart molecule to know, like, only to get adducts off of DNA and not to affect the DNA itself. So I'm not sure how we're going to be able to do that, or even if we need to do that. Any other questions on that one, Sarah?
I can share my experience with DNA adduct testing, which I first did at about 9 months from the fluoroquinolone injury. And the result showed that I developed DNA adducts from ciprofloxacin to nuclear DNA. And then I repeated the test at about 3-year mark. And that this time it didn't show ciprofloxacin DNA adduct anymore. It did show some other weird adducts, but not the ciprofloxacin.
Is that because you're huffing gasoline?
Sorry, say again? I was inhaling gasoline.
I was throwing you a curveball, Alex. I asked if you were huffing gasoline because petroleum products are some of the adducts that are out there, or sniffing pesticides, or taking some chemotherapy agents.
among the new adducts that came up on the result are indeed some gasoline, diesel, fumes, something like that, and some herbicide as well.
I was right.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kidding.
I have a
Thank
question.
you for sharing that.
Yeah,
That's an important piece of information, that because we do have intrinsic DNA healing and repair mechanisms. And that'd be kind of a cool 5-year study to do. I don't know how you'd keep people together that long to see if pre and post adducts were still there. I'll talk to
I have a
Jersey
question.
about that.
Yeah, I did not use the same lab that Jersey used with his studies. I did it through the German lab.
Okay.
But I think it's the only available, commercially available.
That's the only one I know
to do
of.
this. Yeah. I have a question in regards to physiological treatments that
Yep.
we reviewed, one treatment came up, which is a shockwave therapy that I don't think you ever mentioned, and I'm interested to know what your opinion is in general and in relation to treating fluoroquinolone toxicity affected patients.
So shockwave, I usually don't think of from the physiologic standpoint, other than kind of local chemo regulation and work. It's more neuromuscular. But when you get neuromuscular, you're certainly helping lymph flow, you're helping blood flow, you're helping the tissue clear out some of the metabolites that haven't been cleared out for a while. Because one of the things that happens with diseased or damaged tissue is you build up a lot of metabolites because you're not moving it very well. You're protecting it. And that's one of the things that Shockwave does, is to help get everything moving a bit. Dr. Nash does that on all the patients here, and nearly ubiquitously, they like the result of it. But from a strictly a physiologic standpoint, I'm not familiar with that. Were you talking about it generally or from the physiologic standpoint?
From the physiologic standpoint, when it is used, when it is applied to tendons, let's say.
Yeah, local physiology for sure. It's a helpful thing, because it's going to get things moving neurologically and vascularly and lymph as well.
The real question is, whether it is like, it's not as what do you call it, snake oil, and it's not. If it's not, then is it safe to apply to us, to those who are affected with?
Yeah, I should probably mention there are two significant groups of shockwave therapies. The ones that were done on tendinopathies, I was trained in that in my fellowship in 2006. And that's a more potent and more focalized version of shockwave therapy. That's validated for tendinopathies. Shockwave therapy generally, I mean, that can just be, like the little gun that's used, may or may not have enough energy to affect the tendon or ligament intrinsically, but it will still help with neurologic function, blood flow, lymph flow. It's one of those things that it's unlikely to hurt, and it may help the process. Until there was PRP for tendinosis, your basic three options were prolotherapy, patches of nitroglycerin type, or calcium channel blocker patches, as well as shockwave therapy. Those were your three things. PT also, eccentric exercises. And all those things are still valid. Just my experience has been that really well done regenerative injection is far more direct, far more quick, and far more effective than any of those other things.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mark, you've known Jersey for probably a while. Any extra thoughts on adducts?
Yeah, I was one of the 50 people in that study. I had to go to the US and submit blood samples with the chain of custody thing. They had like an officer there, plus the FedEx guy, plus two people from the hospital, and me all had to sign this paperwork to document that it was my blood that going in there. And yeah, they were having trouble getting these studies published. You can't get anything published that will document that the pharmaceutical industry has harmed massive numbers of people. So kind of a corrupt era. Real science doesn't get published and fake science does.
Well, that's why the docs can keep saying that they're extremely rare reactions.
Yeah. We're not aware of any studies that show anything of this sort. It's because you absolutely refuse to do them.
Yeah, it's career suicide for a lot of the PhDs if they did it.
Yep, yep. I am, that's what I'm pitching to maybe get some funding for a study using the Ontario Health Systems database to look at the health outcomes of people who combine fluoroquinolones with other drugs. And hopefully maybe I could pitch it as something that, like, we'll spin it our way, that it's, you know, we'll be able to present that the fluoroquinolones are hurting people, especially in these conjunction with these drugs, and you'll be able to spin it that it's not your drugs, it's the prescribing and the combination of or whatever. But at least I might be able to get it done that way. But yeah, it's just hard to get anything like that published. And so Jersey as it looks like we might get it published in Poland. And so, or I think that's actually happening, but I'm not certain. We were going to talk more about this, but and that was going to sort of be a part of this, but they were unable to come up to Canada and join us for health reasons. So, as is the case every year, I envision this giant symposium in Toronto with people flying in, and then it turns out so and so's going blind, and so and so's bank account is drained, and so is, you know, having seizures, and so a few people show up and do what we can.
I had the same vision for Faha.
Yeah, it's coming together. It's all, you know, we do what we can, and you never know. I mean, sooner or later, the one person you talk to is the person that happens to have money, or happens to have clout, or happens to just be mighty motivated because they killed his mom, or, you know, whatever. And yeah, you know, it's a long, ongoing, lifelong battle. We'll just keep doing what we can. And that's the cause that that leads into the comment of people take up a cause for better or worse. I've buried myself in this, and it's been cathartic and healing and helpful, but it's also, I've poured myself into it to the point where it's unhealthy. You were saying that this is kind of like Jungian analysis of the different approaches of healing and stuff. I did some psychology courses like 40 some odd years ago or whatever, and it's Rogerian self-actualization is kind of to me seems like what a good like maybe the psychologist you're closest to it that I'm familiar with. Let's see, the other note I noticed, just as far as questions about therapists or stuff, I've just found that if, you know, there's therapists that think they know what they're doing and that they have their routines or whatever, and there's the ones that, I mean, if you can't get your therapist to completely be on board and acknowledge that you are unique and that you're conditioned, you can't just do the things he does with other people and whatever, then you need to just walk away from that person immediately. You know, there's I've seen therapists harm me, and I've seen you know, just reports of therapists harming people over and over again in our community. And I think it's becoming more and more, you know, there's more evidence and more knowledge about the harm by these antibiotics. So it's a little more easier to convince someone or to find someone that's at least got a clue. But yeah.
Come on now, Mark, admit it. You feeling like it was fluoroquinolone toxicity was just that you couldn't have a good emotional connection to your mom.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
It's transference. Come on. I know. People call that, you know, like gaslighting and things like that. And I will tell you this, providers, including myself, we are all imperfect humans. We all have our own coping mechanisms. We all have our reasons for what we're doing. We're looking for the reward to be able to, you know, to be able to legitimize what we're doing and why we're doing it, how we're doing it. I told you what my payoff is. That's a fun payoff, actually, because
yeah,
it's somebody getting to a fairly highly actualized state for me to be really excited about that process. But I don't care who it is or what kind of provider they are. They've had to have gone through their own processes of actualization to be open to being effective to you, for you, and not use you as a servant for their own needs. And that exists all across the entire spectrum. I don't know how you could actually help providers be in a much more actualized state so that they can be more selfless and neutral servants to the people that they're with. Maimonides had a great writings on that about 1300. He was a Jewish physician and philosopher. Lovely stuff. I mean, it's really getting yourself out of the equation and truly helping another person go through the process of their own actualization is not easy to do. To create that container for another person, you've got to have done it a lot for yourself. I'm 52 and I think I'm pretty good at it, but geez, I've still got lots of warts. Anybody put anything out there on the question chat that I missed? I have a question for all of you. Now, I've been doing this for about 15 years, and literally I could do 52 podcasts, one a week, that are at least 45 minutes long and still not cover everything that I've put together for fluoroquinolone toxicity and these really elaborate integrated approaches. I've come to respect that from that standpoint of neutrality. It's not my job to make sure everybody goes through the most full kind of healing that they need to for their best result. It's my job to hold the space for them to go through the type of healing they need to at that time. But even though I'm a little condescending about individuals that only do IV therapies and they're only doing a little piece of the equation, if that's where the human being is and that's all that they can do meaningfully at this point in their life, then you're serving that person well. So with this plethora of information, understanding, experience that I have, how do I best serve you guys? Really? You're all going to give me crickets on that question?
I think that's a good question. I think I'm in that boat of trying a lot of different things, but not committing to like one thing specifically. And I'd be interested in hearing healing stories of people that you've worked with and hearing, I know everybody's different, but I just love hearing how people decided what treatment would work for them and how they're feeling post-treatment and if they identify as being healed.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm going to be, as we're speaking, I have 10 people doing video testimonials for me, and I'm reforming that part of the fluoroquinolone or that part of the Regenerative Masters website around, kind of the narrative of what healing is, and then putting their testimonials in different parts of that narrative. Because what's been an enjoyable thing for me is when I go back and talk to people, they'll identify different pieces of the equation as like the spark that helped them go forward through their healing process. And if for no other reason other than, if the fact that the individuals I'm working with aren't extremely gifted, very humble, very highly technically capable individuals working together in a collaborative team, if that's not enough, I learned something a couple of years ago that's actually extremely important to put in a plug for the team healing approach, which is this. People would come back to me and say, Dr. Hansen, you were really good for that, full-on information, helping understand the big perspective of everything. And, I felt like they felt like I was kind of creating all of the structure for them, but they would identify somebody in the group. Actually, the most common one is the physical therapist. Her name is Shannon Maxner. I saw Alec Miller on the end of Alexandra and said that Shannon Maxner, she's a 35-year career, does things very few people in the country do. But this woman is like the Energizer Bunny. She's like positive to the day, till the cows come home. Energy just bouncing all over the place. She's 55 years old. and she's just excited, enthusiastic the whole time that she's working with somebody, meeting them right on the spot, helping them see and feel and understand what she's doing with them for a 55-minute long session. And she was the most consistent one that people would come back and say, yeah, you were really good for all the understanding the information and the structure, but that woman like energized me, like I like connected with that woman. And after I connected with her, then I opened up to everything else. It's almost like she sparked their placebo effect. So that was a really interesting thing to learn about team healing, that you know, it wasn't all on my shoulders to help people access their own healing capacities. They needed that synergy of another human being, you know, connecting with them to be able to access, and kind of their openness and their trust to be able to access their placebo effect. If you guys ever know anybody that comes here, you probably heard them say this, heard about me telling this story. It's impossible for me to describe what it's like to be here until you're actually here and experiencing it. And I talk in big swaths of highfalutin discussions of these providers that I work with, and they're tremendously talented and gifted humans. Selfless in every way that I can understand. They're just glorious people. And every single person that comes here will say, yeah, you didn't overspeak the experience. Being with this many people that are this gifted is what I end up calling Minnesota envy. It's hard to package it in a bottle and take it home with you because it's such a unique experience. And I just feel blessed on a daily basis that I get to work with these gifted people all the time. So I'll start having, I've had some of them come on and do their piece of the equation with me when I'm doing podcasts previously. I think I'll reignite that process again. A lot of them are actually kind of shy. They like the fact that I enjoy doing this with people, you know, discussing all of the spokes on the wheel and putting it all together in one big structure. They like that I can do that because they're like, I would never do that. I think Dr. Wogan is the only one that would otherwise do that. He's the one he actually started an international organization for scoliosis. There are 50 places around the world that use his techniques. Amazingly gifted person. What else? How else can I serve you guys really well?
I definitely like that you're going to present these as broken down and you know, go through them and be able to go back and add a little extra slide or whatever where it might be needed or whatever. It's like, this is great in its own right, but it's the core of something you can put together over time that would be even phenomenal.
Thank you, Mark. Knowledge is free. You know why I say that? I was either taught what I understand or I was inspired with what I understand. It's not mine. Being able to share it freely with other individuals, for them to use it not use it, for them to engage it and embrace it and integrate it into your own lives the way that it's best for you, is the way that I think that this should happen. Now, my bias in that direction was because I started having epilepsy at age 10, and I thought that the physicians were morons, the way that they approached it. So I didn't like that I had to depend on them for this, that, or the other thing. I wanted to learn how to ascend that mountain myself. Now, I needed their help, but I didn't want to be dependent on them. So my views of how I approach this as a physician is very, very flavored by my own experience. And that's not true. And not everybody wants to be independent. Not everybody wants to go through a really, you know, challenging process. They'd rather take the escalator up, not the stairs. And that's okay. That's not my life. I like having to run the stairs sometimes backwards just for fun. But I like the challenge. I like the process of transformation. Or maybe I'm just used to it because I've done it since I was age 10. So
Ron, I'm
go
really
ahead, Alex.
Oh, sorry, you were gonna say something.
Now you go.
I am really surprised by the relatively small attendance that these sessions generate. And maybe part of the issue is that the first session's Zoom meeting number was incorrect. The one that was published on the leaflet
Yeah.
is not the one that maybe that was the issue. I don't know, but or insufficient marketing channels, so to speak, or the complexity of the material. I don't know. Maybe the delivery in smaller portions will also help to figure that out. It's not immediately clear to me why this type of material, which is really scarce in this community, when we have a provider who is genuinely caring about this issue, offers this type of material, and yet the attendance is not great.
I haven't been able to solve that one, Alex. Thank you for recognizing it. And my answer to it is exactly what you said, is try to make it into bite-sized pieces, because even though my brain loves all this complexity and loves to put together things and, you know, all these downstream overlapping domino runs, most humans' brains aren't like that. I understand that. The providers and regenerative masters, they have kind of a, what they call a safe sign or a safe word, like, you know, okay, you know, basically to tell me, you know, to tame it down and to make the message a little more relaxed, because I can get very, very deeply complex and esoteric about the message. There's literally 900 PowerPoint slides that I have to choose from to be able to give these presentations. And most of them are already pretty much done for the next year on all the different pieces and parts of fluoroquinolone toxicity. And I'll keep them to, you know, 30, 40 minutes. So it's not, you know, it's not like you're going to a college course. But at the same time, I do want people to understand, as deeply as they want to get it, how things are happening. There's something powerful about that. And this is my cheerleading moment for you on this topic. The more that you understand the process, the better chance that you'll have of being able to meaningfully embrace the process with your placebo effect. So if you understand each of the pieces and parts, it activates your possibilities. And for the individuals who want to go into this, you know, excessively deeply, I want that to be there. At the same time, for individuals who either that's not their approach to life or the world, I don't want to overly burden them. So I'm going to try to have it be very, very complete for the people who want that, without completely stymieing the people who, you know, just really want somebody to take their hand and help them down the pathway.
Can I just, this is Josh, could I just add something to that point?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think, you know, there's a few factors, just my opinion, at play. I think there's also one factor, which is, I mean, I've been sick for like 3.5 years now, and I've made some progress, but I still have a lot of issues. And I can imagine that myself, and I have definitely come across a number of other people who have been flocks that similar to me, that earlier on, that my degree of brain fog and cognitive dysfunction, and then I think also like anxiety, would have made, you know, like you said, is already quite complex, just, you know, unmanageable for someone that's really at that state. So I think we just have to appreciate that point. It's just, there's some people that they're so sick that they need help, but they're cognitively, it's a lot to ask them to try to be able to comprehend all of this. I agree with you 100% that it's like we need to put it out there and make it available for people, so the people who are interested and have the capacity can bring it on. It's just, you know, some people, they're just not in a place that they can work with it, at least, you know, at some point in their journey.
Well taken, Joss. I've gotten that from quite a few people before, that they love the stuff that I put out, but it seems a bit intimidating. Like they're not going to be able to come if they won't go through the whole process. And I don't want that to be a barrier for people. Kind of I could do a whole module where it's just, okay, based on mitochondrial function and the steps that all the different complexes are going through in these 22 different sites, that's how we're doing our IV therapies sequentially like that. And, if somebody wants to just come and do IV therapies, okay, that's what we'll do. I did divide things down to the point of at least having kind of a brain fog neurologic sort of protocol where people could have, some of these really gifted individuals working with them, with me doing stellate ganglion blocks, and then some PRP in the neck to try to get that toward the side of stabilization, because that hits so many things all at the same time, because you're hitting neck stability, emotion, and sympathetic all at the same time. So that was my first foray into trying to give that possibility to everybody to kind of have a trimmed down way of doing this. Well taken, though. I appreciate that.
I think there's a lot of factors as far as why there aren't as many people here as we'd like to see, but one of them for sure is that it's, for a lot of people, it's just hard to sit like this, and for me, this is painful. So I mean, when I post these, it's pretty uniform. The questions, like, well, let me know when it's on YouTube, then people can watch a little snippet and absorb it, and then turn it off, go back and see where they missed did he say glycine? What word was that? So they can watch it at slower speed, higher speed, whatever is comfortable for them, in little bits, so that's part of it. And of course, just even like when I joined the community, everybody had a feeling, there was a whole sense of community that we have to solve this problem. And then once there was thousands and thousands of us, the sense of community and the sense of people working together to step up and solve this problem became more like, expectations that someone would be there to help people, and that they, just that sense of duty to participate, to add your voice to whatever, just doesn't seem to be there anymore.
Nice. Yeah, my penchant towards that side of being very complete is really cool in a way, but it can be like drinking from a fire hydrant. My current really big handout for people who want to go really deep into understanding what I'm doing and why is 150 pages. And if I send that out as a single, 12 megabyte handout to people, nobody ever gets through it. It's too much. So I collapsed it into a single page where you could expand and say, oh, in these 20 sections, I could see 7 different things, and I could only want to see these 2, so I'm going to click on those. And the single page of these 20 different sections, way more effective than sending out a book to people.
So we're again, it's Thanksgiving, and I'm in the process of cooking dinner for umpteen people while I'm trying to do this, so I'm not going to be in the loop as much and for anything else we've got going.
So you guys still get a Thanksgiving because it's not that close to Christmas, is that right?
I like Thanksgiving I like it starting the whole Christmas season, and it seems doing it on Thursday is so much better. Technically, Thanksgiving's tomorrow here. It's like, well, what's the point of a meal at the end of the weekend? So yeah, I'm having Thanksgiving dinner here in Toronto today, and then getting up and driving for 5 hours of driving that takes me 9 or 10 hours with rest time, to be home in time for Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow.
Could I ask a question? And it's fine if this isn't like the time or place. I came in a little bit later, so if this not doesn't fit in the structure, then totally fine to say no, hold it for a different time. But I had a question. Is it appropriate to ask at this point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there something that you could say about if if it was kind of like how do I pose this? If the resources were there, if the money was there, the resources were there, like what do you think would make the most what would translate in the most progress when it comes to understanding better fluoroquinolone toxicity, right? So for all of the areas that are still unclear, like where does your mind go in terms of, okay, if we could do a study, this is where I feel like we should put our focus on, because this is where we would really benefit the most from having a better understanding.
Yep. The thing that hits, and I said this earlier, but the thing that gets more of the pieces of the equation than any other single item is stability in the upper cervical spine. And what's nice about that from the point of view of a study is it's a very succinct set of assessments and interventions and 20 downstream things that you can measure to be able to understand what the next or what the first step is oftentimes for this condition. That's why I sort of made that kind of tighter package of, okay, we're going to use at least some PRP, stellate ganglion blocks, reset the sympathetic nervous system, get working on the emotional system, all as a single approach for the people who just want to get some wind in their sails. You don't necessarily want to buy the 50-foot yacht, but you do want some wind in your sails. That's why I did that. That would be where I would go, because like healing the gut and the biome and the tight junctions, that's a long process, and you're going to get a lot of variable engagement in that. People are not going to be, as stick to the protocol as well as coming in and doing injections, physical therapy, and chiropractic. And I would be interested ultimately in this kind of phased introduction version of how I do IV therapies being something to be studied at some time. That's going to lead to probably the quickest results in people, because you're clearing out a lot of you're allowing then everything to clear out metabolites and get some energy production at the cellular level. So it's a quick way of improving things. That would probably show the quickest benefit. So either one of those two, I think, would probably be the way that I would go, whether we were just looking for quick benefit or we were looking for kind of medium to long-term benefit. Then the long-term ones are going to be the deep emotional, the gut, immune system, and hormonal therapies. Probably be the big things in the long term. How's that sound?
Hey, that's really helpful. A couple of follow-ups. That's interesting observation. I'm probably gonna mispronounce his name, but I think it's like Stefan Piper over in Germany. And it's interesting. I've read he's got like kind of a short book.
Yep.
And it's interesting to me. This is not me trying to speak to at all what is correct or valid whatsoever. But it's interesting because unless I'm mistaken, he's not at all thinking in terms of the structural with the neck, the craniocervical instability. And it's just interesting that that's kind of the state of where we're at, if you, in terms of a fluoroquinolone patient, because if they come across, say, his work, they're not going to get any of that. And so that's like totally a huge miss if in fact that's going to be the core issue for them, or one of the main issues, because you were thinking that as first and foremost. And so if they come across and they end up kind of following his thought process, that's totally missed. So it's like we're still so all over the place as an individual patient when it comes to trying to, get help and figure out what's going to be helpful for you. And I had one other point, but now I'm blanking on it. Yeah, I don't know if it comes up again, but yeah, I just wanted to add that it's just. Actually, I guess the last thing I would say on that is, and I apologize if this is already brought up, but I am interested, Doctor, is you're thinking of. So for myself, and this may be something that other people have experienced, the fluoroquinolone toxicity of getting a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. And so the question is, do you think at the core, is this all the same? That people who are getting a label of fluoroquinolone toxicity or getting a label of ME/CFS, or even if we want to broaden it a little bit further, say getting a label of long COVID, do you think biochemically at the core it's all the same, or actually no, these are distinctly different, and so we shouldn't really think of them as largely overlapping in terms of what's going on?
I think there's two ways to answer that. Number one, there's a lot of commonalities with these things, and if you can get down to like the core, most fundamental pieces of human dysfunction, it's going to be those, 5 things that I named yesterday, which is cervical stability, sympathetic nervous system, deep emotional healing, gut health, epigenetics, and perhaps endocannabinoid system. If you get those things moving appropriately based on individual evaluation, assessment, personalized approach, it's hard to not get significantly better. The difference that I see in a lot of fluoroquinolone patients is once the sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive, that can manifest completely differently in them depending on what their previous injuries are, their genetics, and probably 20 other factors. So you might start with the same domino being pushed down, but in one person it might go to 3 dominoes to the left, somebody it might go 3 dominoes to the right, sometimes it might go 3 dominoes right down the middle, that it knocks down and goes through different processes based on kind of what the other underlying reasons for dysfunction that exist already are. So it finds the weak spot is sort of the way that I would look at that. And the way I tried to present everything this weekend was, these are the really fundamental things that are happening from the fluoroquinolones themselves. You can't just look at that. You have to integrate into that what happened, what a person had going on before that, and what happened after that, and how those things integrated with each other down the road. This is why it's so confusing and challenging, I think, for the medical system, because there isn't a protocol for this. There's a variable, kind of a variable penetration sort of paradigm that needs to be flowed with and followed. And that's really, really hard for mainstream medicine to do. They don't do personalization well, as you all know. So the other way that I would look at that is don't start kind of 20 dominoes down the road, call that fluoroquinolone toxicity, and then follow that as your set of parameters. Start as close and as tight to the original injuries that exist and adopt that as your process-oriented assessment and care model.
Thank you so much.
How's that sound, Josh?
Yeah, really, really helpful. Thank you.
This is Stephanie again. Josh, I just want to say that those are really good questions. I appreciate the responses as well. And this has given me a lot of thought, Dr. Hansen, because I've been on a number of your webinars and followed you through the years, and so it's given me thought, like, really, how can you serve us best? And I like the things that have been brought up today. And I was just going to say, I'd love the idea of more of the podcast regularly. And like Mark said, being able to watch them on our own when we feel the best. But also I think getting your other providers, even if they're shy, getting them on board to host with you or you know, to be with you, partnering them would be really key because I do agree. I think it is a multifaceted healing approach, and people are at different points in their journey, and different people resonate with people better than others, just like you said. And I would love to hear more from the other people on your team and how they've helped people. So that's all.
Thank you, Tef. That's good feedback.
And just to say too, I really appreciate you doing all this and everything that you've done. I appreciate every time you speak to us and are gracious with your time. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I put it this way to you guys yesterday. I tell you that you created me as a physician. And I would call this the most challenging medical condition on the planet. I hope that doesn't make you depressed, but I think it is for some of the reasons that Josh and I were just talking about. And the benefit to me through that is I had to devote myself so completely to personally being in a place where I could be the neutral helper in somebody else's healing process. It didn't just form me as a physician, it formed me personally as well. I had to get my own stuff taken care of so I could help others do that. All right, well, today is my Mayan elder birthday. So I'm gonna let this one be completed. Thank you for being here. Thank you for asking the questions. The more that we learn from and integrate with each other, the more that we're gonna learn and understand how to nuance the elegance of the healing for each person. The Mayan birthday, by the way, is the year that you turn 52. So I'm gonna go play with my brother for a while and go have a fun day.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
And have a good day. Have fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Take care.
You're welcome, Josh.
Thank
Deb,
you, Dr.
Sarah,
Hanson.
Alex,
Mm.
Deb, Evelyn, Mike,
Thank you.
blessings, be well.